Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans. And today, you're actually not going to hear from just us. We're going to do something out of the norm, and we have a couple on, Joy and Peter Harrington. And we're going to be talking about how to rebuild trust after boundaries have been crossed. And this couple is going to get vulnerable. They open up and really share about some boundaries that may be triggering for you. So I'm just going to warn you that if boundaries have been crossed in your relationship and you are working to rebuild trust, you might feel a little bit of emotion. It might bring things up for you, but I really want to encourage you to stay in it, to listen. And I really especially love that Peter opens up about being on the side of the person that did break the trust. How did he handle it? What steps did he take to rebuild trust with Joy? So you're going to love this, and make sure that you check the show notes because there is a link to find them if you want to connect more to this amazing couple and some resources that they have coming out here very soon for rebuilding trust after boundaries have been crossed. So you're going to love this episode, and let's tune in. Well, Joy and Peter, thank you so much for being on this podcast episode with us.
Thank you for having us. We're so excited to be here.
So excited.
Well, we're going to ask some pretty juicy, intimate, maybe even uncomfortable questions.
So audience, get ready. And really right off the bat, we're so happy that we really wanted to come on here to have such a conversation, as many couples fall into this area where they just don't quite know how to rebuild trust after a certain boundary has been crossed. So thank you so much again for being on here and being willing to go into this.
Yes, we are so happy to share.
Well, why don't you guys share your story in terms of why you can even talk about this? Why can you talk about rebuilding trust after a boundary is crossed?
Oh my gosh. So in our life with our story, it started right off when we first started dating. And then right when we first got married, there was a lot of stuff that was below the surface, either secrets or things that we hadn't been fully transparent with. And particularly on my end, I hadn't communicated to Joy a lot of the stuff that I was struggling with in a very transparent way that she could see, that she could hear, that she could fully experience that. 4 or 5 years into our marriage, 5 years, August 27th, 2015, the bomb went off, and all the secrets came to light. I had been addicted to pornography and also had crossed some other boundaries on business trips, and as it relates to sexual integrity issues. I was toeing the line with full-blown affairs. And that's where everything blew up. We had 2 small children, 2.5 and 6 months at the time. And it was a really, really deep, dark place for us. We were separated. And we then went into some really, really intensive therapy and relationship repair. But before that, it was really big repair work on each one of us individually. And so to directly answer your question, we know what rock bottom feels like in that specific area. And we're really excited and passionate about paying it forward to be able to impact and positively influence other people's lives, other relationships that have gone through maybe a similar issue or maybe not the sexual integrity piece exactly, but something similar.
Joy, what was it like for you right off the bat to hear that boundaries were crossed?
So I first asked him when we were dating if pornography was an issue, and he said no. And I just left it at that. I was like, okay, I guess it's not an issue. And then there was a couple of instances before that rock bottom moment where I found out that porn actually was part of his life. I just didn't get the full picture. And so, it was devastating every single time. And then that moment, that rock bottom moment, 5 years into our marriage, that's when I realized oh my gosh, this is an addiction. This is a problem. And it was a mixture of devastation, despair, but also relief in the fact that I felt like, okay, now I know what the actual problem is. Maybe there's actual hope for change.
Hmm. But I do have a question, and I do appreciate you both bringing this up. Either one of you can answer. But one of the things that we find with couples is a lot of times different assumptions are made about what is expected, what's unexpected, what is a boundary. And though maybe in this case it seems more obvious to some of the listeners, well, yeah, you get married and pornography, or, in another sense, infidelity would be crossing a boundary. But a lot of times couples are too vague. It lives like an assumption. It lives like my partner should know this. So I'm just wondering for both of you, was there like a clear boundary set up around, in your case, pornography in the beginning that then clearly got crossed? Or would you say it was more in a expected boundary?
Well, we never discussed it overtly, but I knew going into our relationship, into our marriage, and heck, even in our wedding vows. I mean, I said all kinds of stuff about that, very specifically about my eyes are only for you, and you know where I wouldn't go, and I wanted to keep it very tasteful. I mean, we're talking wedding vows here, but
Yeah.
I was very, very much so like expecting, okay, this was my past life. This is how I grew up. And now that we're getting married, everything's gonna be amazing. And I'm never gonna have an issue with this again. And wow, was I wrong?
Hmm.
I would also say that my expectation was that when you get married, you don't communicate with like people of the opposite gender, right? And you don't really have friendships like that. And that is something we did not communicate on.
Hmm.
And I would say for a while, you claimed you didn't think it was an issue. And you did have conversations going on via text and other things with other women.
Yeah, because then it became more of a double life where I told you one thing, but then if you actually check my phone, my calendar, different things like that, you would have very quickly be able to tell, yeah, Peter's not being transparent with me. And
So, sorry, I got excited because I think that's so profound and vulnerable to go into. So, do you think, because I know that some of the people listening are going to be like, whoa, I really would like to know more about this with my partner. Did you, Peter, feel guilt as it was happening when you knew, like, did you know you were crossing a boundary and did you feel any guilt or what, like, what was going on for you?
massive, gigantic shame. The worst emotional and psychological and spiritual pain of my life. And I carried that guilt and that burden for years and years and years. And interestingly enough, anyone who's struggling with a similar type of an addiction, that's the pain, that's the addiction that keeps you stuck in the addiction. So the guilt and the shame is actually what keeps you stuck going back to the pornography. And then next thing you know, your behavior, you're acting out, the thing itself starts escalating because you have to medicate more and more of the pain. So the greater the temptation level, the greater the pain that you experience. And so, yeah, I was feeling massive shame and guilt. And I'm a terrible guy, terrible husband, Christian father. I mean, go down the list, all of that.
Hmm. And so, what ultimately then brought this to the surface? Since you didn't share about it at first, then did you bring it up, or was it more of a case of you got found out?
Well, I got caught that on August 27th, 2015. I was on a business trip. I had been lying pretty consistently. A year and a half into our marriage, I had come clean to some things about my struggles and my addiction with Joy. And she said, you need to go get help. And then I basically left it there. And I went and got help and got some counseling, went to my church, went through some classes, but then I left it there. And it totally came back way worse after that. And I never really had a point in my time there where I had sustained sobriety. But again, we didn't talk about it. It wasn't something we consistently connected on. And I think Joy was kind of hoping, well, we kind of turned the page on that. And I was on my side going, God, I hope she doesn't find out. And then I came
Mm.
back from a business trip and she confronted me, asked to look at my computer, saw some things, and the bomb went off and it was over.
Hmm.
So interesting because, so do you think, Joy, in that moment, when you found out, were you committed still, like, we're gonna work through this? Or was there any part of you that was like, I'm out?
Oh no, I was completely out. That was
Mm.
Mm,
my, like, I'm so burnt out. There's not even a desire to like give this a chance. I felt like I had been strung along for a while. And so I was like, I'm out, but I'm also freaked out because we had a 3-year-old and a 5-month-old at the time.
Mhm.
And so I was like, I'm going to be a single mom. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't have any income because he was the breadwinner at the time. And the only reason I paused, and I use the word pause because it's key in this, and gave him 30 days to give me a reason to not file, was because of our kids, because I knew I had to be able to look at them someday and say I did everything that I could.
Mm.
mhm. I was even thinking someone that's listening could be in the same position you are, where they're even thinking they're not going to continue. They're not committed. And then there is someone else that might still be committed, but then both of them find themselves at a crossing of how do I build trust? So, would love to start to hear how you rebuilt trust. And maybe you want to share how you even got yourself, number one, maybe to the step of being committed enough to then even go down the steps to rebuild trust.
I love the question, Aaron. And one of the biggest visuals that was really impactful for me was the analogy of a bank account. Our relationship bank account was so hopelessly overdrawn at that point that unfortunately I would make some steps which I felt initially were massive. I gave up a whole bunch of different things, hobbies, etc. And that's just scratching the surface. That might be a $5 deposit at the bank account and you're thousands and thousands of dollars overdrawn. And so for me, that was actually really helpful. On my end of it was working on rebuilding trust is not a, well, I did 2 or 3 things, honey, so let's check a box and get back together. This is a
Mm.
long process, and it might, like, we want to walk the walk and hopefully we're walking the walk together, but we had no guarantees that we were going to make it.
And so for Joy, was it the kids that got you into the place of being committed enough to then go down this deposit journey with Peter?
Yeah, for a long time, I didn't give it like a, okay, I'm committing now. It was more so like, okay, you have 30 days to give me a reason to not file. And here's my list of expectations. And I got really clear on what my expectations were and I gave him a list. And then after that, we started seeing our counselor together. And one of our first few sessions, he had to tell me everything. And after hearing
Mhm.
everything, I was like, all right, I'm calling the lawyer. And our counselor called me and said, could you please give him another 30 days? And I said, why? And he said,
Mm.
because he didn't have to tell you all of that. And he did. And so for
Mm.
me, it was like a step by step, okay, maybe another 30 days. Okay, maybe another 30 days based on watching him and the action that he was taking and giving me a reason to give him that time. And so it was this
Mm.
process for a while of like, well, I am not leaving yet. And I think that's a really important thing to make because women feel, or I felt, a pressure to like make a decision. Like you need to know if you're going to leave or if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
stay. And when I gave myself the grace to be like, I don't have to make a long term decision right now, I can just take the next step. That's when things really started to change.
And I think you walked through the grief process there, and every step of the way along the grief process, you had different needs along the way. So initially, maybe it was get out a lot of anger and or experience despair or whatever that was. And so it's actually very important for the flip side, the other party who was the one, call them the perpetrator or the ones who broke trust in the first place. Your spouse is going to experience different needs along the rebuilding trust journey. And you can't just automatically assume life's going to be a certain way. It's going to change. Your relationship dynamic's going to change very dramatically.
Hmm. So powerful. And I love that grief process. And maybe we'll circle back to that. But I can hear that there's a few listeners who are maybe even a little emotionally triggered by this right now because they do feel in their relationship or even marriage that there should be a boundary about porn and or talking to women of the opposite sex. And so for those listeners who maybe have even brought that up to their partner, but their partner goes, this shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
I can talk to whoever I want, or what's wrong with porn? Like, I should be able to watch this. It's whatever. I'm not with them physically. What would you say to the people where the partner denies any boundary was crossed?
It's a great question. I'm gonna answer the quote, "It's just porn" question, because unfortunately, if you are going to those places, those websites, those magazines, DVDs, whatever whatever your thing of choice is, you're abdicating responsibility of your life to something external, and you don't know the end result. You don't know what's at the end of that journey. And so initially, it's going to start off as pictures and then videos and then more escalation and more escalation. And anyone who's been involved with pornography for any length of time knows that there is a journey, there is an escalation point, and you don't know what that escalation point is going to be and where it's going to go. And you are also permanently hardwiring your brain. Now, after a long period of time in recovery, your brain can restore itself, but picture injecting drugs in your brain and getting neural pathways established that only fire a certain way. So my question to you would be, do you want true, genuine love, sex, and intimacy with your partner? Do you want a committed relationship? Because if you truly do, then the two don't really coincide well together.
Well, and
Whew,
here's the advice that I would give the previous me when you were telling me, like, it's just porn or I should be able to talk to other people, that type of thing. At the time, I would just get upset, but I didn't know how to really open my heart and share vulnerably with him in a way where it was a positive, like, hey, this is what I want with you. Instead, I would come at it from a negative of like, you're doing this. And so what I would tell myself now is to sit down, make a list of what my needs are, what my non-negotiables are, what my boundaries are, and take him by the hand and say, I really want to be close with you. I really want to be growing with you. I really want to be intimate with you. And when this happens, I don't feel safe. I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. And when you respond this way, it makes me want to shut down. It makes me want to pull away from you. And that's not what I want. I want to be close with you. Can you work with me on this? Can we talk about this? It's a completely different approach than you're doing this and I'm really upset and that's not okay.
Yeah, because then that activates my shame cycle, if you will. And then unfortunately on my end, it was all behavior modification, but it further deepened the shame, which made the addiction worse. So it's really counterintuitive on the approach side of things, being transparent about your boundaries and being very specific about what you need. And I think that goes for both parties.
So what I'm hearing you say, because that was really powerful, what you shared, Joy, and then what you just said, Peter, is so the approach, if you are the one that feels like your partner is crossing a boundary, talking to women, people of the opposite sex, pornography, any other boundary, texting with people, looking at people's Instagram, and, you seem to look at a lot of the opposite sex, whatever the boundary is, it's the approach. And what I'm hearing is, Joy, even if they're mad, they're sad, they're hurt, if they go to the person with that emotion, it then triggers the shame cycle, which makes them more likely to not, quote unquote, admit or not be open to talking about it, and therefore not be able to talk about changing their behaviors.
Well, and I think you can still go to them and let them see you have tears. You can still let them see you be hurt, right? It's not about like not showing emotion, but anger is usually just protecting you from feeling what's deeper. And anger is protecting you from letting someone else see you in that pain. And so it's really pulling down that wall yourself and saying, this is what's really going on within me. And this is how I really feel. I'm sure it's easier for me to just get angry at you and yell at you because then I don't have to show you my heart. But when I remove that, or when I step back and say, what's really underneath the anger, that's when I can come with more of an open approach.
And I would say just a follow-up to that is ultimately our goal is to be whole, complete individuals who can 100% give of ourselves to someone else in a healthy relationship in a healthy way. And if I'm worried about her reaction or she's worried about my reaction or vice versa, there's all kinds of elements of codependency there. So when we're talking about rebuilding trust, we have to be 100% we have to be 100% accountable for our own actions and our own emotions. I don't make her do anything. She doesn't make me do anything. And then we can gradually work towards a wholeness and a coming together from that place, as opposed to, well, I'm worried if she's going to do this, and I'm worried what she's going to say if I tell her. Well, guess what? That kept me stuck in a spiral for years.
Hmm. Peter, I have a question for you and one for Joy as well on how you really got yourself into a place of self forgiveness that you actually could, or what role self forgiveness or love played for you. But then also, Joy, as I was listening as if I was an audience member, I thought to myself, well, I really love the idea of being able to pull these walls down and like open my heart to share what's really there with my partner. But I'm wondering for you, at what point in your heart you actually felt that trust was being regained, and it was even clear to you that you could get back and have love and intimacy, because those seem to be two different phases someone can find themselves in. So, how did you get yourself into that next step?
They are a couple of different phases. The first phase after the bomb goes off is survival mode. And survival mode is really big in building that trust and learning how to basically navigate a relationship again and also hopefully achieve sobriety. And then thriving comes after that. You have to be able to, be sober and be working together in your marriage. And then you can work on rebuilding love and intimacy. So it's kind of a two-part thing. I would say forgiveness has been a process over the last 5 years. It was not a one-time thing. I think it's been a process as you work through the layers in your heart, as you work through the layers of grief, as you work through the layers of those walls.
So self-forgiveness, you had asked me, Aaron, and that's a great question, because we have, starting as early as 4, we start feeling and experiencing shame as kids. And so I'm 38 at this point. That means I've bathed myself in 34 years plus of shame. And unfortunately, if we don't learn how to forgive ourselves, then next thing you know, it's either a victim or a martyr mindset, or we're blame shifting towards our partner. And it's you always, you never. And then there's a lot of that stuff going on. And so learning how to forgive myself, that's a very, very big thing. One of my favorite phrases, which I've just recently learned, is, even though I fill in the blank, I still completely love and accept myself. And so it was, even though I blown up life and looked at porn, even though I betrayed my wife, even though I didn't show up as the daddy and the husband and the father, whatever that I wanted, I completely love and accept myself. It's not an overnight thing. Learning how self-forgiveness, learning how to get to that place, that's a journey, and that takes a long time. And it's also very, very rewarding.
No, did you ask me, Aaron, about pulling down walls?
I had just asked what really comes after that. You pulled down your walls, you opened your heart, which kind of, it sounded like got you back to the place of like being committed to the relationship, but then moving into a place of like love and even like attraction again seemed like to be something maybe totally different.
Yes, 100%. And that's what we've been working on in the last year with our coach.
Yeah.
That's when we hired a coach, was, hey, we're in this spot where life isn't blowing up anymore, but we're ready to thrive. We're ready to bring back love and connection to a deeper level and polarity in the marriage. And that's been where understanding the masculine and the feminine and all of that comes in too. But it takes a lot of work to get to that point, to even bring down the walls, a lot of inner work on both sides. And if you want like actual steps as far as rebuilding trust goes, there were very intentional things that he did that helped.
Yeah, there was a 7-step process, which I'd love to get to later on in the show, as far as specific.
Let's hear it now. I think that's a perfect time to share
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
Sure, that's great. So when the bomb goes off, there's very specific things that you want to happen, and you want to establish. So the biggest thing on our end that we learned about was consistency. I can't build any relationship credibility if I'm constantly inconsistent. And that the biggest way that shows up is being realistic in my time estimates. If I think I'm going to be home in 30 minutes, I would always be this forever optimist. I'll be home in 20 minutes, baby. And then something waylays me at the office, or I get stuck up in traffic. And next thing you know, I'm road raging on my way home and I've showed up an hour later. That's not a way to rebuild trust. So consistency is a really big one. To stay consistent, specifically in keeping your word, and things on time commitments was a big one. Second thing is transparency. So that's going to show up in terms of time and money and email and bank accounts and that type of thing. So I actually proactively gave Joy a list of, here's all the passwords to my email accounts, and I got rid of a few of them that I didn't need. I had 8 or 9 email aliases at that point, and there were 4 or 5 ones that were junk that I had just never really checked much. No need for those. Get rid of them. But transparency on that is very critical. So it wasn't that I was expecting her always to look over my shoulder, but if she ever needed to in those moments, she could. Number 3 was set boundaries. So that's going to show up again in the early on rebuilding trust process. That's going to look different than if it's later on more towards the thriving point. So for me, it was pretty much open and shut on setting boundaries. I love on my family and I work and I don't do much else. So I eliminated a lot of hobbies. I eliminated a lot of things that didn't necessarily serve us at that point in time.
We also set boundaries with family and outside relationships at that point too.
Absolutely. So we didn't show up to every single family function. And members of the opposite sex, for example, I had all kinds of people in my phone for 10 plus years, and it was a pretty much hard and shut. I'm going to get rid of all those contacts because I didn't need those. I mean, ex-girlfriends and all that stuff. I didn't need that. I didn't want that at that point because I was very, very clear on my intention. I want to love and serve my family, my wife, my kids, and I'm not going to deviate from that. So setting boundaries was a huge thing for us as far as eliminating and paring down some things that didn't serve us.
We also had the 5-minute rule, which I loved because oftentimes I would try to call him or get a hold of him and he just wouldn't be available. He wouldn't answer, and maybe it'd be hours before I would hear back.
Yeah.
And so we implemented what was called the 5-minute rule. And it was, if I call you, you have to answer, or you have to call me back within 5 minutes, or I get to assume the worst. And that was huge because all of a sudden I wasn't just left for hours wondering, what's he doing? Where's he going? I wonder if he's talking to someone, because I haven't heard back from him for hours.
So that was step 4 is on the communication side, and the 5-minute rule. That was huge for us. And then number 5, I wanted to be overly communicating about showing her I'm doing my work. So I do my work, but I want to show Joy that I am staying in this for the long process.
Instead of me having to ask you.
Exactly. So instead of her having to constantly pester me about, well, did you do the exercises that Jason gave you? Are you journaling this morning? Or blah, 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 blah. We had specific check-ins where I would initiate those. And we called it a feelings check-in, where we went through a specific acronym, and we walked through different things. And it was, again, initiated and led by me. Because so often it was, up until that point, a great mystery. What's going on in Peter's world? And this is where I get to intentionally do relationship repair work and initiate. And that's building blocks of intimacy. I'm setting the foundation for what our future can be.
And that was huge for building trust because it made me feel like I wasn't just waiting for the other shoe to drop, but instead you were proactively there showing me, no, here we go. I'm here. I'm initiating. I want you to know. I want you to know what's going on with me. I want you to know that I'm doing my work.
Number 6 was mindset. So it's not enough to do the work or show up on time or call you back when I say I'm going to, or all these things. If I have a mindset of either a victim or a martyr, or gosh, this is such a pain, like I had to give up football and give up doing my racing and blah, 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 blah. Mindset is so critical, because if you just simply do something, but there's not the heart behind it, and there's not the tenderness, the compassion, the understanding that, hey, I blew up life and we're here for a reason. And so I definitely want to stay consistent with making relationship repair. It's all for naught. So it's very, very critical to have a very healthy mindset and a tender, loving approach. And there were times where I showed up with flowers and they ended up in the trash. and and that's still okay, because as you were walking through various different stages of grief, well, that vase of flowers didn't really make it that far that day. And I still know that that's okay, because I'm in it for the long haul. I'm not just here to do some outward show stuff. It's actually very, very intentional heart work below the surface. Not just a temporary thing, but it's permanent.
Wow. Did you go do the seventh one?
So, and then on the seventh one was very specific, intentional work on me. So I got in a group, and you also got in a group too. And so work on me is going to look like personal development. It's going to look like understanding emotions, understanding needs very, very differently than I learned up until that point. And intentional work on me, and then being transparent and showing you that was also very critical in our rebuilding trust. So there's your 7.
Oh, really love the steps. We love things that are easy to visualize as well as really act upon, for sure. Would you mind summarizing all 7 steps together again?
Totally. I might get the numbers slightly off, but here we go. So setting boundaries. Actually, I started with consistency. So consistency is number 1. Setting boundaries, transparency, communication, like the 5-minute rule. Also the mindset about it is a long-term process, transparency, and getting in a group, or getting help from me, doing work on me.
Mm-hmm. What I really love is the emphasis, like the underlying theme. I hope everyone who's taking away from this is, well, a couple come out. One is you both decided to commit to the work.
Mm-hmm.
And even if rebuilding trust was, we're focusing for the next month, we can't guarantee 6 months from now, we're focusing right now. The other thing was you really invested into this. It wasn't just like, oh, you had one conversation, you should be over it by now. Okay, I said I'm sorry. You really did the work, even the underlying harder conversations. The other thing is you got support at all stages of this. And for some of you listening, and when I get DMs from you guys where it's like, we're trying to rebuild trust, we're trying to heal from this, a lot of you don't have outside resources. You're not seeing a coach or a counselor or going to workshops. You're just hoping that trust will be rebuilt. And what I hope that the listeners, you are taking away is Joy and Peter did the work, and they had support along the way. And rebuilding trust is not just a one-day thing, or even something you can really do only on your own, having that space. And so I think we could go for like hours more, but I really wanted this for the audience to be kind of opening the door for them to hear, number one, a success story, but also hear like those 7 steps were brilliant. And Aaron, what would you like to add?
Well, I have one last question, as I'm thinking someone out there must be also having this thought, and hear from either one of you, because we get the question pretty often when it comes to rebuilding trust. Do you have these conversations in front of your kids, or do you do this on your own? I thought it was just a perfect place to ask you both, what's the balance here? Do you let your kids, number one, even know where trust was broken? Do you let them show the process? How did that go for you both?
Well, I would say it depends on every situation, on every couple. And that's also a great question for when you get outside help, asking the reference group, your counselor, or your coach.
And it depends on how old your kids are. Our
Exactly.
kids were very little.
Yeah. So Simon was 2.5, Scarlett was 6 months. So they wouldn't totally understand. Now they do emotionally understand something's not going on right with daddy and mommy, but they can't put a finger on it. They don't know what it is. And so that's actually something very critical. Kids, and maybe your own self, that for listeners out there, when you're thinking about yourself and your own introspection, you're going to be going through life, and lots of times you won't know why something triggers you so powerfully. But a lot of times that's because of stuff that happened and you don't actually remember what it was, but you remember the emotion. The trauma was stored in your DNA and in your muscle memory. And so for us, we didn't go out and share that with our kids. At some point down the road, I'll probably have a very intentional conversation with them. Again, if your kids are older, there may need to be some kind of conversation, but I'd reference your coach and the outside help that you're getting in that situation.
They've always seen us going to counseling and working with a coach, though. They know that that's part of life.
Yeah, they know it's Coach Jason or Coach Steph or your coach or my coach. I mean, they know that daddy and mommy are doing work on themselves, and they're very specific and intentional about that. And that's just part of our life.
And that's amazing. And I think everyone can borrow from that is you invest into yourselves as individuals and invest into your relationship. And so
what a great example.
Yeah. In closing, would you just both share with the audience, like, is there hope? Like, if someone is hearing this and they're like, is there hope for us to rebuild trust after boundaries have been crossed? Would you just give them kind of a couple lines on whether you think there is hope in that?
Oh, absolutely. Is it easy? No, but nothing in life that's worth having is easy. But there's absolutely hope. There's always hope. And it can actually end up becoming the biggest blessing in your life, the biggest opportunity to heal parts of you that you don't even realize need healing, that were there long before this relationship, long before this boundary was broken. And so it can be a huge opportunity for you to actually have something even better than before.
Yeah, I would say, I love that, baby. I would say too, visualize a pendulum. It's been all the way on one side for a long time in your life, and it's going to swing the other way, and it's going to feel really painful. There absolutely is hope, and it's going to swing that direction. But one thing that my coach said early on, again, very humble man, spirit of humility, he would say, I'm not the best CEO of my life, and I'm not above making terrible decisions on my best day. So keeping that spirit of humility and keeping that mindset of, hey, this didn't just randomly happen. There were a whole bunch of things that contributed to this, but I do know that it's the long-term person that I want to be. The man that I want to be is a man of integrity, even more so whether or not we stay together. If the goal is to stay together, then that's actually a lesser goal. The goal for me was being a man of integrity, whether or not we stay married.
Whoa.
Wow.
Whoa, that was a mic drop right there. Like,
Wow.
And that is powerful because what's in that is that you weren't just trying to do things out of compliance to keep you, which is what sometimes people do when they're trying to rebuild trust, is they do everything that's to be compliant for the other person when they're not genuinely trying to transform themselves, and they're not really seeking the type of person that they want to be. They're just trying to keep the partner out of fear. So that was transformative, what you said at the end there. And I mean, you two have been so open, so vulnerable, and truly, like, I really want to honor you for staying in the relationship and doing the work and showing that you two actually supported each other in healing. And of course, you had to take responsibility on your own for that. But I just really want to commend you two. I'm super inspired by your breakdown to break through. And really, thank you for being so open. And especially, Peter, there's not many times that you get to hear from, the person who, quote unquote, broke the trust, and to hear you share so candidly and openly, I think is going to be really profound for people to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you for that, both of you.
Yeah. Thank you for being on today. I know that we're probably going to get a bunch of questions in our DMs, so we may come to you with like, hey, you have thoughts on how to answer this, but thank you both truly. And we're grateful for our friendship and getting to know each other a lot more, but thank you both for being here today.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, before we close out here, we wanted to make sure that if you listened to this episode and you felt like, wow, I think we could use some support, I think that this is something we could use an outside listener to navigate us through this rebuilding trust conversation, we do want to let you know and extend our hand that we work with couples in rebuilding trust and establishing communication, having the hard conversations. And so know that you can reach out to do a private 1-on-2 or 2-on-2 couples session with us to be able to support you in having these conversations go differently within your relationship. So go ahead and actually send us a DM on Instagram, or you can email us at connect@newpowercouples.com, and let's set up a session so that you aren't on your own in rebuilding trust and establishing that strength within your relationship again. We love you all. We're here for you. Don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll talk to you all on the next episode.